Well, welcome to Indiana Landmark Center. I'm Suzanne Stanis, the Vice President of Education, and I'm honored to have served as Indiana Landmark's representative for the rehabilitation of Samara. We're excited to have Barbara Gordon, Executive Director of the Frank Lloyd Wright Conservancy, with us tonight. And following her talk, then we'll take a look at some of the specifics that we did on Samara. So as of tonight, I do not believe there has ever been a presentation on the rehabilitation of a Frank Lloyd Wright property that was under budget and ahead of schedule. As of tonight, that record will stand. We didn't do it either, sorry. Barbara will discuss Wright's Usonian vision and address the creativity, perseverance, and yes, money it takes to keep these architectural treasures vibrant. Barbara Gordon joined the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy as Executive Director in May of 2017. A resident of Oak Park, Illinois, Gordon was employed from 1994 to 2015 by the Chicago Architecture Foundation, her last position as Vice President of Program Operations. Prior to joining the Conservancy, she worked on program development for Unity Temple Restoration Foundation and the Elmhurst History Museum, where she designed programs for the exhibition in her own right, Marion Mahoney Griffin. Gordon has served as a board member of the Glessner House, Pleasant Home Foundation, and the Chicago Bungalow Association. Please join me in welcoming Barbara Gordon.
Hello, everyone. Are you hearing me okay? Yes, good. All right. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really honored to be speaking to an Indiana Landmarks audience because of what you do, and all of you support this wonderful organization, and it's just really a wonderful model for the entire country of what you do. So as we celebrate the recent restoration of the John E. Christian House, Samara in West Lafayette, tonight, I'm going to talk about Wright's Usonian vision and some of the preservation issues that we see in these buildings as they age. So before I do, let me first tell you about our organization, the Chicago-based Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy, which was founded in 1989 by a group of concerned citizens, including Wright homeowners, public site administrators, architects, preservationists, and admirers of Wright's work, just like you and me, who conceived of an organization with one goal in mind, and that was to save Wright buildings. Our mission is to facilitate the preservation and stewardship of the remaining built works designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, and we do this through education, advocacy, preservation easements, and technical services. And we're the only organization focused exclusively on the preservation of all of Wright's remaining buildings. One of the biggest endeavors that our organization spearheaded was the more than 15-year effort to get what's called the 20th century architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright inscribed onto the World Heritage List in 2019. The 8 properties that make up this World Heritage Site are located in 6 states. And the 50-year period covered by the sites in this inscription was one characterized by dramatic technological and social change. These buildings provided new solutions to the needs for housing, worship, work, education, and leisure. And as you can see, this group of buildings is the 24th World Heritage Site in the United States, of more than 1,000 worldwide, and it's the first representing modern architecture in the United States. So let's start at the beginning. Who was Frank Lloyd Wright? We say that Frank Lloyd Wright is the greatest American architect of the 20th century and one of the most important on the world stage. In 1887, Wright arrived in Chicago from rural Wisconsin during the building boom that followed the 1871 fire. And while in Chicago, he joined the progressive firm of Adler and Sullivan, where he worked until 1893 when he branched out on his own. He and his clients wanted an authentic American architecture that was drawn from the inherent beauty of natural organic principles meant to embrace and exemplify American democracy. So Wright came onto a scene at a time when many U.S. architects, particularly in the Midwest, were struggling to define its architectural identity, one that was not influenced by historic European styles. He was born in 1867, right after the Civil War, and he died in 1959 at the beginning of the space age. That's a pretty amazing life. He practiced 72 of his 92 years. So he had a career that spanned that allowed him to design not just one kind of style like the Prairie Style, but to go on to evolve his work as society changed through the mid-century. And he was not just fixed on one region, but he had a large geographic influence. In round numbers, during his 70-year career, Wright designed over 1,000 structures and saw half of them realized. Almost 15% of his structures have been lost to demolition, neglect, or natural disasters, leaving nearly 400 remaining structures, as you can see, located in about 3/4 of the United States, 1 in Canada, and 4 in Japan. So Wright's career had some distinct influences that shaped his architectural vision. As a boy who grew up in rural Wisconsin, the organic principles of nature were an early and a lasting influence. His architecture went on to employ geometric abstraction, based literally or figuratively on nature's forms and principles. His mother made sure he was exposed to the Froebel system as a child, and these educational toys gave Wright a knowledge of geometric forms and a sense of space and void, becoming one of the major influences on his own work. Of particular significance to his developing aesthetic was the Japanese woodblock print and the culture that produced it. And one of his first encounters was no doubt the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition held in Chicago, where Japan and its arts were well represented. And he made his first trip to Japan in 1905. He traveled there again in 1913 and between 1917 and 1922 while working on his famed Imperial Hotel. Finally, his 5 years working with the progressive American architect Louis Sullivan influenced his work as he looked to define a new American architecture that was void of references to historic styles. Wright's early work dates generally from the 1890s, and they reflect typical styles of the day, such as colonial revival, Queen Anne, or the shingle style, like his home here in Oak Park. But a closer look will often show unusual geometries and details that are clues to Wright's experimentation during these years. As a young architect living and practicing in the western suburb of Oak Park, the Chicago region became an early laboratory for his ideas as his neighbors and his friends hired him to design their buildings. Wright's early houses were generally built using methods typical of their day. So the restoration challenges of these houses tend to be similar to other houses of the period. Spanning roughly 1900 to about 1916, the Prairie period has been called by some as Wright's first golden age. And his now classic Prairie house is low slung, usually without a basement or attic, with a central fireplace marked by a broad chimney rising slightly above a low sloped roof. And rejecting references to historic styles, the Prairie house was appropriate to the American landscape, with a horizontal plan and the low hip roof with overhanging eaves, and the open floor plans that minimized interior walls and allowed for maximum circulation of light, with rows of windows that dissolved the walls. And the relationship of the house to the surrounding landscape became one, and there was a more intimate relationship for the inhabitants to the outside. The Prairie period favored more organic decor, using simple natural materials and the integration of nature into the work. This period includes some of Wright's best-known residential work, including the Martin Estate in Buffalo, which is amazingly beautiful, where an engaged client allowed Wright to create a complete work of art, including its architecture, decorative arts, and landscape. and Roby House in the Hyde Park neighborhood of Chicago, which is considered the quintessential prairie house that perfected a new paradigm for domestic design by allowing interior space to flow from one room to another in a primarily horizontal form using its open floor plan. And for this reason, Roby House was selected to be included as part of the World Heritage Site I referred to earlier. For the Prairie House, typical construction methods of the time were used, often in very atypical ways. Steel sometimes augmented a stucco-covered wood framing or a masonry structure to create broad cantilevers and other striking effects, like we see here at Roby House. From the mid-1910s to about the early 1930s, Wright produced relatively few buildings, yet this period continued to exhibit his originality and his inventiveness. Early in this period, Wright developed his American system-built houses. And these modest wood frame stucco-covered houses were built from pre-cut materials that standardized construction and reduced costs. In style and form, the American system-built homes are related to the Prairie Houses. Collaborating with Milwaukee-based Arthur Richards, who gained the exclusive rights to manufacture and distribute the homes, over a dozen of them were completed and are located in the Midwest states. However, the U.S. entry into World War I would soon divert materials to efforts abroad, ending Wright's early attempt to provide inexpensive, beautiful housing to Americans. And then in the early 1920s, Wright produced much of his American work in the Los Angeles area, including the early textile block houses. And these homes were constructed of concrete blocks fabricated on site. The walls were made of 2 layers of blocks tied together with steel rods. And using this technique, Wright created some of his most distinctive houses, whose unusual construction technique has generated maintenance challenges since they were built. So you should be very glad that Samara is not a textile block house, but they're fantastic. Wright was not just interested in individual house type, but he was also interested in city and suburban planning. In his 1932 book, The Disappearing City, Wright put forth his first outline for an unrealized planned suburban development that he would promote throughout the rest of his career. He was a lifelong proponent of the Jeffersonian belief that a connection to the land and the self-sufficient life that working the land provided were essential to a vibrant democracy. And he saw Broadacre City as a way to achieve this ideal for the middle class. The plan was for a fully decentralized series of low-density communities, and each Broadacre community was intended to accommodate 1,400 families, with every family having a 1-acre homestead. Connected by raised multi-laned highways, the automobile was central to the functioning of these communities. While unrealized as Wright envisioned, Broadacre City did give rise to the concept of the Usonian house. And so the Usonian elements that I'll talk about today became basic components of the residential structures that Wright designed for the rest of his career. The Herbert and Catherine Jacobs house in Madison, Wisconsin was completed in 1937, and it's considered the first of Wright's Usonian houses. And for its influential solution to housing needs in the 20th century and its influence on a global scale, like Roby, the first Jacobs house was included as part of our World Heritage Site. While up to this point, many of Wright's clients were wealthy, Herbert and Catherine Jacobs, a newly married couple, contacted Wright in 1936 and inquired about a house for a family of ordinary means with a budget of $5,000, which is about $108,000 in today's dollars. Wright accepted the challenge and construction began the following spring. The Jacobs family with their 2 children lived in the house for 5 years. In the Usonian houses, Wright was offering a simplified but beautiful environment for living that Americans could both afford and enjoy. Usonians were a direct response to the need for domestic comfort among the growing middle class that live without servants and which embraced the eventual impact of the automobile on American culture. They were built with simple materials, had flat roofs, with large overhangs for natural cooling, and were set on a concrete slab with radiant floor heating. And its strong connection to nature was achieved by fitting the L-shaped plan snugly into the corner lot and turning its back to the street. Wright integrated the carport into the structure of the house, artfully sheltering the car while saving the cost of exterior walls. The carport led to a small entry vestibule, which in turn led to the open living room, which was anchored by a central fireplace at one end and open to the outdoors on the other. Space flowed freely into the dining area, which received ample light from east-facing windows. The small kitchen, or workspace, as Wright called it, opened directly onto the dining area. Its ceiling was high with clerestory windows providing light and ventilation. Adjacent to the kitchen was the one bathroom for the family. The hallway to the bedrooms was narrow, eliminating what Wright considered wasted space. Bedrooms are small. Wright felt that the family should gather together in the living room and not be segregated into separate spaces. He didn't have teenagers. Still, these rooms have a close connection with their natural setting. Always with an eye to cutting costs, the Usonian house is built on a concrete slab on grade, colored with integrated pigment. Each Usonian house is based on a planning module. In the case of the first Jacobs house, the module is 2 foot by 4 foot. And then the module is scored into the slab, and the walls and the openings are dimensioned off of the scored module. They are heated with radiant floor heat provided by hot water filled pipes laid in a crushed stone bed beneath the concrete slab. And because the slab is heated, deep foundation walls are not required since the warm slab is not subject to frost heave. Centralizing the utility core with kitchen, bath, and heating kept costs down by limiting runs of piping and other utility components. And the walls of the Usonian are minimized to 3 layers of sandwich wood. The exterior and interior layers are set horizontally and held in place by narrow battens screwed to a central layer of vertical boards or plywood. Millwork, such as the bookshelves in the living room, as well as corner turns in the walls, help stabilize the wall system. And all components work together to make a strong whole. Flat roofs eliminate attics and cut down on construction costs. Different roof levels allow for varying spatial experiences within, intimate low ceiling spaces or more expansive high ceiling spaces. And clerestory windows between roof level allow for ventilation as well as additional interior light. Hallways, which Wright would call galleries, led to the bedrooms, and in later versions, he would provide cabinets for storage. And instead of punched openings, there are large expanses of full height windows and French doors that connect interior to exterior. The earliest Usonian houses in particular expressed Wright's fundamental ideas regarding functional organization, innovative construction, material expression, connection to the setting, and affordability. With the first Jacobs house, Wright set in place a process that he would follow for the rest of his career. At the same time that Wright was working on the first Jacobs house, he began a house design for Paul and Jean Hanna at Stanford University. While the vocabulary and the process of the design and construction of the Hanna house followed those of the Jacobs house, its hexagonal module made for a house with very different architectural qualities. With the Hanna house, Wright opened up the possibilities of the Usonian plan even further, and many of his later Usonian plans used modules based on the 30-60 triangle, including the hexagon and the equilateral parallelogram. In 1942, the Jacobs family decided to move to a farm on the outskirts of Madison, And there, Wright created another seminal design for them, the solar hemicycle, which actively took into account the movement of the sun and the site's orientation to prevailing winds. For this house, Wright based his plan on a radial module, allowing spaces to curve around a central open space, which took full advantage of its south-facing orientation. And the north face of the house was bermed to insulate it from the north winds. For the rest of his career, Wright would go on to design approximately 150 Usonian houses across the United States, using variations on the Usonian theme introduced in the Jacobs house and reflecting the diverse client budgets. Today, these homes range from about 65 to 85 years old, and many have had subsequent generations of owners who continue to preserve and maintain them. These homes are truly organic in that each component of the house is related to others, including the Usonian automatic, which is the concrete block houses seen on the bottom right at the Khalil house, which is the next generation of his earlier 1920s textile block houses. These individual and specialized works are peppered across the United States. Usonian houses can be found all across the country, from New Hampshire to Arizona, from Washington State to Florida. Like many of Wright's residential clients in the post-World War II period, John and Catherine Christian were just starting out and their finances were limited. The Christian house, Samara, has benefited from their commitment to complete the home and its fittings over the long term per an agreement between them and Wright. And as such, it is also among a very few extant Wright designs that has maintained original finishes, equipment, and furnishings for more than 50 years while meticulously seeing the architect's original design intentions through to completion. And due to the home's exceptional level of authenticity, it was recognized as a National Historic Landmark in 2015. And it is only one of 27 Wright structures to receive the nation's highest designation of cultural significance, and only one of 5 Usonians, along with the first and second Jacobs house, the Hannah house, and then Kentuck Knob in Pennsylvania. So you can see the plan of Samara includes the same components as the first Jacobs house, though in a somewhat more elaborate form. So you have a carport with relatively small entry, the living room with central fireplace and access to outdoors, a free flow into the dining area and kitchen, a central core with kitchen and utilities, though Samara has 2 remote bathrooms, and a narrow hall accessing bedrooms. The living room at Samara has the same spaciousness as the first Jacobs house, but here the floor level changes create differences of architectural experience instead of the ceiling level changes. And it can be seen how much more elaborately Samara has been outfitted in comparison with the bare necessities of the Jacobs house. Similarly, the dining area and kitchen are more generously proportioned, but the flowing relationships of spaces is still key. Off the narrow hallway are bedrooms with the same close relationship to outdoors seen at the first Jacobs house. So the same things that make these homes so unique are also primarily what bring challenges for their owners years later. The organic quality that is an important part of the creation of a complete environment of a Wright-designed home can often require careful attention during renovation, restoration, since every decision has ramifications in multiple ways. Deteriorating concrete can be replaced in sections, but the nature of its integral pigmentation requires finding and hiring a skilled installer. The radiant heat pipes in the floor often corrode over time and leak, and their location under the floor slab makes it inaccessible. So special techniques such as infrared may be required to locate leaks and replace pipes. Over time, the system may fail completely, and a decision needs to be made about going with another type of system or replicating the radiant system and thus busting up the concrete slab to great expense. Because Usonians were built to save money, with their sandwich wall construction, Wright minimized spaces that might otherwise be used to run utilities or add insulation to the uninsulated wall system. So updating can be complicated. Adding air conditioning is a good example. Because there are no attics and limited basements, if any, retrofitting may require creativity, such as the removal of the ceiling or the roof decking to access the limited space between the joists. And while everyone likes to knock Frank Lloyd Wright about his leaky flat roofs, it's not about flat roofs as much as it about the detailing of the changes in the level and the flashing around chimneys and other vertical surfaces. Wright's desire to differentiate roof levels with light coming through clerestories creates another opportunity for water intrusion. And all this can lead to leaks in interior and exterior efflorescence, which now their homeowners have to try and solve. Wright's preference for exposing natural wood on the exterior provides opportunities for wood deterioration through either moisture, biogrowth, or invasive species such as carpenter ants or woodpeckers, and deterioration of wood due to water exposure at the base of floor-to-ceiling windows or French doors is not uncommon. While there is an overall system to Usonians, each house is a unique house. Any needed replacement elements often cannot be found at the corner hardware store or big box retailer, and wood may need to be replaced. And in some cases, that species of wood may no longer be available, such as certain mahogany species that Wright specified. Brick production processes have changed over the years, so sourcing matches may take effort. Hardware is not easily obtained, and even specifying replacement mechanical equipment can require research. And that's one of the things that our organization, the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy, does, is help identify sources for components as well as finding knowledgeable professionals. So there are 4 other Usonians in Indiana. Each is unique. From the hill climbing Armstrong House in Ogden Dunes to the Davis House in Marion with its peaked living room and parallelogram planning module. Many of the features of the Usonian house would be incorporated into suburban housing after the Second World War, including an emphasis on one-story living, non-traditional arrangement of windows, living and dining areas that flowed together for informal living, and a carport. Usonian design is considered among the aesthetic origins of the ranch-style house popular in the American West in the 1950s. So if you have been inspired today, I will say please join us as a member at savewright.org. Our members enjoy many perks. You can see people touring and experiencing buildings. One of the things we're doing is an online talk about preserving Wright buildings, including our upcoming talk on Samara restoration on the 23rd via Zoom. We also have weekend trips to visit Wright buildings, including our upcoming Out and About Portland, taking place the weekend of May 6th and 7th, and we will get to see the 1956 Gordon House, which is a Usonian. And our signature event is our annual fall conference, which brings together building stewards of Wright-designed buildings and preservation advocates from around the world to strengthen our collective knowledge on Wright's legacy and the ongoing preservation of these buildings. And this year we're going to be in Minneapolis from the September 27th through October 1st, and we'll see many Usonians firsthand, privately owned, including the 1955 Loveness estate, as you see here. And finally, if you feel so excited about tonight's talk, you can own your own Wright house. There are currently 4 houses on the market right now, and they're all Usonian. And what's one of the things that our organization does, we have a part of our website called Wright on the Market, where we list all the houses on the market. And so you can get information by subscribing to our e-news or just checking it out. So I think we have 2 in California and 2 on the East Coast. So if that excites you, we'll talk at the end. So yeah. So I think I'm going to turn it over to you and then we'll do questions at the end. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Barbara. I'm joined this evening by Nathan Allaire, who is Samara's curator. Nathan joined our team in January. Let me get up to the right side. Whoops, am I going the wrong way? There we go. Joined our team in January, and he comes to us with a lot of experience from working at a Usonian home in Iowa, known as Cedar Rock. And you'll notice on this slide that it says at the bottom, co-stewarded by Indiana Landmarks. So let me just explain what that means. The Samara is owned by the John E. Christian Family Memorial Trust, but Indiana Landmarks co-stewards the property by managing the finances, the staff, and the maintenance. So when you support Indiana Landmarks through your membership, you're also supporting Samara. And we also, of course, welcome donations to help finance the work that we've done. So let me go through some of the pre-existing conditions. So the house was completed in 1956. And while this image portrays a very sunny view of the house, a closer investigation revealed that it was time for a little help. And after 70 years, who doesn't need a little nip and tuck pointing? So we took it on. And throughout the talk, I'm going to be referencing a couple of areas just to show you. One of them that we'll focus on is the terrace, which you can see is the L shape around the living room. And then the lanai, which is a combination of grass and concrete that is from the master bedroom to the guest bedroom. In 2019, we hired Harbo Architects of Chicago to complete a conditions assessment that confirmed our need to do immediate work. Among the most concerning issues was the foundation settlement on that terrace, which created cracked concrete along with a cracked window in the living room. We also saw displacement along the terrace wall where a steel plate that had been installed to kind of deal with some of that early settlement was losing its effectiveness. And the lanai wall exhibited similar issues. It was settling and it actually pulled away from the house. The settling also created deflection in the eaves along the living room and staining caused by water infiltration. And then once we peeled back some of the euonymus and the copper sheathing, we found rotten trellises on the terrace and deteriorated T-posts on the living room doors. And this gets into what Barbara was talking about, that exposed wood. And in general, the finishes throughout the exterior needed work. The driveway suffered from a lot of spalled and cracked pavers. And fortunately, in 2020, Indiana Landmarks received a $500,000 Save America's Treasures grant from the National Park Service. And these grants are designated for National Historic Landmarks, of which there are 43 in Indiana, at least according to the National Park Service website. So our friends at DHPA, please let me know if that number has gone up. And as Barbara mentioned, that Samara was listed as an NHL in 2015. So I'm going to turn the podium over to Nathan now, and he's going to talk about some of those structural challenges and creativity that we dealt with.
Thank you, Suzanne. Jumping right into the rehabilitation process, it was determined that severe settling of the terrace had caused cracking of the concrete and windows, deterioration of brick, and caused deflection in the roof. To address these issues, selective demolition was performed. A trench was dug deeper than the original foundation because it did not extend below the frost line. It was also discovered that the original foundation was setting on more than 1 foot worth of river rocks, some of which had started pouring from underneath of the foundation of the house. With the river rock stabilized with lean concrete, the new footers were poured. The footers are what spread out the weight of the building into the ground, and this new one will last many decades to come. The new concrete terrace floor is 6.5 inches thick. Note that in this photo, the repairs to the eaves required removal of the copper and Philippine mahogany fascia. This work was done by Danco Roofing. With a solid foundation underneath, attention was then given to the structural needs of the property. Seen here in this photo is a common 2x8 top plate integrated into the ceiling joists. Weight of the roof was transferred from the top plates into the metal posts, ultimately going into the foundation. So to make the structure more rigid, steel plates were added to stabilize the eaves off the living room. To transfer the load of the roof more evenly to the steel beams and posts, a flitch plate was installed at the joist header to provide exceptional rigidity to the structure system. The flitch plate is highlighted with a red line in this photograph. Joints between the metal posts and roof joists were also revised with metal flitch plates. Other existing metal elements, like these steel T-posts, were sandblasted and galvanized to protect them from rusting further. For reference, steel T-posts are what make the living room at Samara appear as if the roof is floating above the windows. They are encased in Philippine mahogany, so they appear as a part of the windows. Moving on to the heating and cooling system, this is one of the manifolds for the radiant in-floor heating system popularized by Lloyd Wright. Pressure tests initially indicated that the radiant heat might be repaired, but we determined that the leaks were slow and could not be stopped by a chemical compound called leak stop. The system has been abandoned. Because the living room is carpeted, we can install a heat mat in the future to mimic the radiant heat. Moving on to the cooling system for the house, the system was upgraded from the original 1967 unit on the left-hand side to the one in the right-hand side. I'm just kidding, correction. It was upgraded to a heat pump system. It is a clever machine that does exactly as the name applies. During the summer, the heat is pumped from the inside of the house to the outside of the house, cooling the inside. But during the winter, the system runs in reverse and absorbs the heat from the outside and brings it inside. Here are the special pipes that carry the heat in a special refrigerant liquid above the carport to the air handlers inside the house. The air handlers are in the ceiling of the kitchen and can receive supplemental heat from the boiler that was formerly used for the radiant in-floor heating system. Originally, the ductwork was designed to wrap around the entire ledge of the living room. However, the height of the ductwork obstructed the iconic clerestory windows when standing on the living room floor. Not to worry, the ducts were re-engineered to lower the profile, but this meant that the room would receive less air. We opted for aesthetics over airflow. The ductwork is hidden behind African mahogany wood trim. When I first arrived to the house, this is what I saw. It was difficult to tell that there was an air duct below the clerestory windows. Now I'll pass the mic back to Suzanne.
So while those T-posts were out being galvanized, we took out all of the storefronts and the French doors in the living room, the dining room, the guest, and the master bedrooms. The workers then installed tempered glass per code, and we still have original glass in the entryway and in the nursery area. And here you can see how that African mahogany, which we're no longer able to get Philippine mahogany, which was the original, how that's gone back over those T-posts and hides them. And now all of the doors are operable with new or repaired screens, and we are really looking forward to getting people back out on that terrace during tours and events. Because of that settlement of the foundation, a lot of those doors wouldn't open. The team gathered several brick samples to get the right match. So the new brick is extremely close in color, but it has a slight texture difference. That's really about the only way that you can tell the new from the old. Harbo architects reviewed mock-ups to ensure the masons raked the horizontal joints in typical Frank Lloyd Wright fashion. And we were able to mix new and old brick together to create the most seamless blend. So we had about 70% new brick and about 30% that we were able to salvage. We repaved the driveway using a blend, again, of new and salvage pavers. And look at that needle light. It's so wonderful to have that working again, as well as the lamps throughout the yard. Prior to the removal of the damaged concrete, we took core samples and sent them to Henry Firk's Sons in Chicago to analyze the composition and the color match. We wanted to make sure we had this just right. And again, as we did with the brick, we did mock-ups to test the color application and test the makeup of the concrete. So I did learn more about pouring concrete than I ever imagined I would learn. I'm not sure how much of it I still retained, but I was really impressed by the high-tech system that they were using to put that color composition on there. You'll notice it's a fish net, like an aquarium net taped to a pole. So real high-tech. But it worked. Well, so while the concrete is wet, this custom color topping is sprinkled on the surface before it's hand troweled in. And to achieve Wright's characteristic surface, the top pour must be steel troweled 2 to 3 times to eliminate blisters that could scale away potentially during freezing temperatures. And you can see the man in the front with the blue shirt on is from Henry Firk's son, Matt Wolf. So he came down and actually worked with the concrete company to oversee and make sure things were going right. The wet, we actually had to mix the concrete on site rather than pumping it from a truck, because again, that is to lessen the amount of air that goes into it, which could also cause those blisters. So here you can see the final product. This is right in front of the guest bedroom on the lanai and the front entrance. So because the temperatures began to dip into the 30s before the concrete had completely cured, Brandt built a wrapped shelter with space heaters to keep the temperature at 60 degrees. And over the Christmas vacation, I got a call from our finance department, and they said, we think there's something wrong at Samara because the electric bill is 3 times higher than it's ever been. It's just concrete curing, that's okay. So let's finish the look with the finishes. So I talked about the rotten wood on the pergola. 2 of those pergola beams had to be completely replaced because of that rot. And the remaining 3 were sanded and refinished in place. And you can see they just look absolutely wonderful. Those plywood clear story windows had delaminated to the point where they just simply couldn't be repaired. And so those were replaced. And again, sourced with an African mahogany veneer. So we are really looking forward to opening the doors back up on May 5th and sharing Dr. Christian's passion for the work of Frank Lloyd Wright. And I'd like to recognize the construction team that helped us with the project, as well as the village of subcontractors and suppliers. It took a lot. Everybody really dedicated themselves to this project. And more. And a special thanks to the Christian Family Memorial Trust Board, including Marsh Davis, the president, who just got out his pen and smiled every time I said change order. So thank you, Marsh. And also to Linda Eels, who I know is with us here tonight. Linda, thank you so much. Linda had been the curator for and been involved with the house for 20 years. She recently retired right before Nathan started. So having her there to lend her expertise and knowledge of the house was very helpful, as well as Scott Montgomery, who is our regular maintenance person. So we encourage you to go to samarahouse.org. We are selling tickets online, and they are available Wednesday through Sundays, and they're starting to sell quickly. So take a look at that. And with the time remaining, we'll invite Barbara back up and be happy to answer questions. And Mindy, if we've got questions coming in for Zoom, just let us know. Anything? Okay. Okay, the question was the terrace and the cantilevers for the roof the highest cost item? I think the biggest cost item was definitely the concrete, and then also the unexpected surprise of the river rock coming out. So those were two pretty big ticket items. Yeah, and then also we discovered initially we thought we only needed to do work to the cantilever roof in the living room. But upon doing some exploratory demolition, found out there was more problems in the dining room. So that was another one of our change orders that added to the project. Sure. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. What was the total project cost? It was just right over $2 million. Oh, information about tickets. Nathan, wait, you know all about that.
So information about the tickets. Tickets are available on our website, samara-house.org. We have tours available at 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. Tours last an hour long. When you buy tickets online, you also can pay for them there. If there's more people than you planned on, we may be able to accommodate them as space permits. So where to begin? More about the Christian family. Dr. Christian was born and raised in Indiana. Mrs. Christian was born and raised in Storm Lake, Iowa. They had met at Purdue University and were married in 1948. They had received an oven, which is in the house today, as a part of one of their marriage gifts. And together they knew that they wanted a house where they wanted to entertain students and guests, and they wanted a house that had a future, one that would grow with them. That is Mrs. Christian's words all the way from 1951 to Frank Lloyd Wright. And Frank Lloyd Wright really took that to heart, and they had spent nearly 50 years completing the house.
Yeah, any questions from the audience? How long did the restoration take? The question is, how long did the restoration take? We started in May and finished the following or the same December. So yes. Take that one.
So the question is, did the foundation or original foundation that was not under the terrace receive more reinforcements? Yes. When we had dug that deeper trench, the new footings were extended underneath of the old footings. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that concrete is 6.5 feet. In the talk, you said 6.5 inches. So yeah.
Oh, 6.5 feet. Not
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So for example, they had started off with a blank slate. They had gotten their Usonian house, but it didn't have details like the perforated clerestory windows. It didn't have the dining room or dining room chairs. The copper fascia was a major one. Other textiles throughout the house that are patterned with the Samara wing seed, the Samara rug. Those are a few that I can think of off the top of my head right now. Size-wise, they can range from cabinets.
No, but you're talking about they add on to the house? Yeah, no, they didn't add on to the house. What they did was complete further details on it. So
Mhm.
yeah, so that the house as it exists today is the size it was in 1956. Yeah. Well, until my retirement. You know, the question was, this 70 years we had to do this extensive restoration, and how long will it last? Well, it's a good question. I mean, I would say we've over engineered some of the parts, pieces of it from how they were designed. So, and then also we really intend to implement an annual maintenance schedule. And, you know, as Dr. Christian lived in the house until he passed away. And so as he aged, it was harder for him to take care of some of these things, as his daughter lives out of state. So we hope too, by kind of keeping up the annual maintenance, that it'll last a long time, more than 70 years. Yes. Do you know? I bet Linda knows. Where's Linda? What's the square footage on the house? How much? 2,200 square feet. Thank you. And back? You want to talk about the veterans or? We answer that? Well, in some areas, the wood was rotten, and there were Dutchman repairs that were made on some of the windows, as well as some of those areas around those T-bars. And then also by galvanizing the T-post, that will help, I believe, with stopping some of the deterioration of the wood. Nathan, can you? Nathan speaks constructionese a lot better than I do.
So preventing wood rot around the bottom of the T-posts where there's a wood covering. There is a clear coat that is on the wood that will repel rainwater. And there's also a silicone bead around the bottom between the wood and the concrete surface. I believe that would have been originally like a clay that would have been pushed into the crevice. So it's more a matter of more modern materials available at our disposal. Yeah. So initially the house was not air conditioned, but there were plans for ducts to be added to the bedroom wing of the house. And the air conditioning, or the air conditioner, as the Christian family could afford it, was simply plugged in off of the tool room in 1967. That is original to the house. Yes. All the way from 1956. Dishwashers were a newer technology by the 1940s, so they were a little uncommon. But I'm sure that, well, actually, Mrs. Christian did request a dishwasher in an essay that she wrote. It was a 28-page essay labeled, you know, what we need for how we live. She made 136 specific requests of what they wanted in their home.
That essay available?
It will be available during the tour. I say she, you know, took some inspiration from her husband as far as education goes. But she was very meticulous. She was a planner. She liked to host a lot of parties, and she loved to express her creativity in arranging and decorating the house. But
I'll look to Linda now that I know you. Mrs. Christian she worked at Purdue, correct? Isn't that's how they met? but then she became a homemaker after they had their daughter.
Sure. So Samara is a name that means winged seed. And Frank Lloyd Wright had chosen the name for the property because there were a lot of pine trees on the property. And if you know, like for reference, like a helicopter seed off of a maple tree, it's got a wing with a little tiny seed and it spins back and forth. That's what the triangular abstraction in the clerestory panels looks like. It's repeated in the rug, in the back of the chairs. Frank Lloyd Wright's always inspired by nature. So Usonian is a term that is coined by Frank Lloyd Wright, and it's like a shortened way of saying United States of North America. And when you start shortening it together, United States of North America, United States own, Usonian, that's where the name comes from. Mhm.
Summarize the bush.
Yes, yes. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, it is how did Frank Lloyd Wright determine the costs for these projects? Mhm. So by this time in Frank Lloyd Wright's career, he had a very detailed contract with these homeowners. And in that contract, I believe it was rated at a flat rate of 5% for his architectural services of the total cost for the project, which would be, determined by materials and labor by the contractor. Yes. So the question is, what was done to encapsulate the HVAC lines running to the kitchen along the outside of the roof? Those pipes are encased in about 2 inches worth of insulation. It's basically like a pool noodle that's been wrapped around the pipe. Mhm. Well, yeah. So no, as I understand, the roof was last done sometime in the late 80s, early 90s. Mhm. Mhm. We do have photographs in our archive, which was started up by Dr. Christian himself. And the photos do describe what the house looked like when they first moved in. They had initially bought Frank Lloyd Wright designed for anyone, heritage Henderson furniture. And then as they could slowly afford the ones that Frank Lloyd Wright had specified for the property, then they had those made. And also mine too, when the crafts person that had the amount of skill it takes to make some of the furniture was another factor in determining when some of the details were finished. Mhm. Well, that's an interesting point. So because I mentioned earlier, so the question is what was Frank Lloyd Wright's relationship after the house was being built? Did Frank Lloyd Wright visit the site? And so to answer that, well, Mrs. Christian created the 28-page book. She was very detailed about it. Frank Lloyd Wright was very detailed about the plans. And he said to the Christian family, I don't need to know what I don't need to visit because I already know what it looks like.
Is there a question over here? Oh, yes, okay.
Yeah, so I can answer that by saying that anytime that you want to take any likeness of Frank Lloyd Wright's work, his name, anything like that, you have to get permission from the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation. I would say no. Yeah, no. Yeah, so, and that's where the licensing issue, they'd have to go to the foundation and say, we want to reproduce this. Yeah.
Yeah, even though the rug is in Samara, we don't own the copyright to reproduce it. Yeah, okay. Okay, so yeah, if the foundation wants to reproduce it, they can. Yeah. Yes, yeah, yeah, there you go. Yeah, Motawi makes a tile of that design. Yeah. Okay, I think we just got time for like maybe one or two. Yeah, the question was that you took a tour led by an elderly gentleman who knew everything about the house. I'm sure that was Dr. Christian. He really enjoyed giving those tours himself. Yeah. Okay, one more. Sorry. Well, we don't call it a house museum, and Dr. Christian didn't either, because it's very much more of a learning laboratory. I mean, if you visited him, you sat on the furniture, and that's what we do today. And so we want to use it as a laboratory to show the Usonian techniques, to show the work of Frank Lloyd Wright. So it's I don't consider it a museum. Yeah.
To add to Suzanne's question, being the new curator of Samara, I also take to heart Dr. Christian's wishes that the house remain a learning laboratory. So you'll always be able to sit down on the furniture. There'll be no roped off areas of the house. And I'll work very hard to make sure that it is more of an experience rather than a conveyor belt of information.
What a great way to end it. Well, again, I'd like to thank Barbara so much for coming down, and be sure to check out the Frank Lloyd Wright Conservancy webpage, as well as Nathan. Thank you for coming down from West Lafayette. We encourage you to get online and buy a ticket, tour it for yourself. And remember, as we said, your membership to Indiana Landmarks helps support Samara, and we appreciate everyone that came out tonight. Thank you so much.